It's time for Warhammer. In this battle report, the Dark Elves will take on the Wood Elves. This is game number 3 of a 15-game series. After each team plays each other once, there will be a double-elimination playoffs. Let's look at the armies for this match. Starting with the Dark Elves. This is the army of the mutinous warlord, Optimus Callus. He wears medium armor and carries the biting blade, which gives him armor piercing 1. With his magic weapon, he costs 65. Next to him is a unit of 20 dark shards. They wear medium armor and have repeater crossbows. They also have full command. They cost 270 points. Behind them is a unit of 20 bleak swords. They have medium armor and carry swords. They also have full command. They cost 210 points. Behind them is a unit of 20 dread spears. They also carry spears and wear medium armor. They have full command. They cost 230 points. There's also a unit of 8 dark riders. They have light armor and spears. They also have a full command. They cost 166 points. And then finally there's a unit of 5 harpies. They have no command and cost 60 points. All of these units except for the harpies and the dark shards have shields as well. The entire army is 1,001 points. The breakdown. These are the Wood Elves from the Moon Shadow Glens. They are led by a Glade Captain with a longbow. He is worth 60 points. Next we have a Spell Singer. He is a level 2 wizard from the Lore of Light. According to our club rules, as a level 2 wizard, he knows the signature spell, plus 2 more spells. And in this case, those are spells number 1 and 2. The Spell Singer is worth 120 points. Next we have 15 Glade Guard. They have hand weapons and longbows. They have a full command, but no armor. They are worth 225. Next they have 10 Deepwood Scouts. They also have hand weapons and longbows. They have no armor and a champion only. They will be using True Flight arrows. They are worth 170. Next up are 20 Eternal Guard. They carry Seraths, which are spear staves. Also they have shields, light armor, and they have a full command. They are worth 250. Next up are 15 Dryads. They are skirmishers and they have a champion only. They are worth 175 points. The total army adds up to 1,000. The breakdown. Over to the battlefield. And we set up this battlefield using our club's random landscape generator. And the landscape rolled was hills. And this setup is a little busy in the middle of the battlefield. There is a total of 3 hills, and one of them is mysterious. There's also 2 forests, a small house, a rock formation or hoodoos, a cave, and the cave is also mysterious terrain. Basically, a random beast will come out of the cave if a unit gets too close to it. Looking at the opposite end, you can see the mysterious hill. There's a total of 3 fences and walls. Next to the hill is a little pile of bones. There's also some random trees and shrubs. Let's look at deployment. And the Dark Elves deployed on the side near the cave. They have the Dark Riders on their left flank, the Dark Shards on the right flank. The Dread Spears are in the center, the Bleak Swords on the center right, the Harpies are on the center left, and then the Elf Master is deployed with the Bleak Swords on the center right. And here's the Wood Elves deployment. They have the Dryads on their left flank. The Eternal Guard are in the center position. The Glade Guard are center left. And then the Deepwood Scouts are deployed in a forward position in the forest. The Spellsinger is deployed with the Dryads on the left flank. And then the Glade Captain is running solo between the Glade Guard and the Dryads. Here's a side view. Another look at the forest. Here's the Dark Elves from the side. And before we start the game, the Dark Elves have one Vanguard move to make. That is with their Dark Riders. They will advance down the left flank at full speed. And now the battlefield is all set up. We are ready for turn 1. And the Wood Elves will get the first turn. No charges to declare. For remaining moves, the Dryads marched forward. The Deepwood Scouts stayed in place in the forest. And then all the other elves moved their normal 5 inches forward. The Wood Elves will not attempt a magic phase nor a shooting phase, so that will end their turn. Over to the Dark Elves. No charges from the Dark Elves. Remaining moves. The Bleak Swords and the Dread Spears marched forward. The Dark Shards moved forward but did not march. The Dark Riders continued forward at full speed down the left flank, and then the Harpies took off into the air and moved forward a little bit. That will be the end of turn 1. The Wood Elves had no charges to declare, and all units marched forward. Time for the magic phase. The Winds of Magic generate 8 dice for the power pool, and 0 dice for the dispel pool. In the Bonepile Miniatures rule set, if an army does not have a wizard and they do not have magic resistance, then they do not get a dispel pool. Such is the case with these Dark Elves. The Wood Elf's wizard is nested in the unit of the Dryads. He will attempt Shem's Burning Gaze, the signature spell. The target is the Dark Riders. They are long range. Therefore, the wizard will need the boosted version of this spell, which casts on a 15+. So the wizard rolls 4 dice, and he does cast the spell. But it goes off with irresistible force. The extra power may cost him, but first we resolve the spell on the Dark Riders. This spell causes D6 Strength 4 hits on the unit, and in this case he rolled up 4 hits, and then 3 of those hits went through as wounds. The Dark Riders rolled for an armor save and scored 1. Therefore, 2 final wounds go through on those Dark Riders. But since there are only 8 Dark Riders, those 2 wounds will be 25% of the unit, which is enough to force a panic test. But the Riders passed the panic test. Now that the spell is resolved, we must go back to resolve the irresistible force effects upon the wizard. This was done using a miscast table, and our club has our own miscast table that we have put together. Our version of the miscast table is on the screen. We roll 1d6 and add the number of power dice used to cast the spell. and that was 4 in this case. So the wizard rolls and scores a 5 on the miscast table. So effectively, he will forget the spell that he just cast, Shem's Burning Gaze. And he will also drop 1 wizard level, but there's no other effects. That will be his only spell and the end of the magic phase. Shooting phase. The Deep Wood Scouts hiding in the forest will target the Bleak Swords, the closest Dark Elves unit. The Scouts fire 20 shots, and 5 of those make hits, but only 2 go through as wounds. The Bleak Swords have a 4+ armor save, and they score 1. Therefore, 1 final wound goes through on those Bleak Swords, and that will end the Wood Elves' shooting phase. And that will also end their turn. That's a total of 3 Dark Elves eliminated. Dark Elves' turn. Movement phase. On the right flank, the Dark Shards make a normal move forward. In the center, the Bleak Swords and the Dread Spears both march forward. On the left flank, the Harpies are in the air and they soar forward, which is flying at double speed. And then the riders continue marching forward down the left flank. One of those riders is forced to hoof through the forest. This forest is not mysterious, but it will force that rider to take a dangerous terrain test. And he passes. And this will end the Dark Elves' movement phase. They are not yet in range for shooting, so this will end their turn. Back to the Wood Elves. Wood Elves, turn 3. Movement phase. No charges to declare. All units march forward, except for the Scouts still hiding in the woods. They remain in place. The Eternal Guard are moving towards the right flank in order to counter the Dark Riders. Over on the left flank, the Dryads don't hesitate to surpass the hill. Magic phase. The Winds of Magic generate 5 dice for the power pool. The wizard will attempt to cast Phase Protection, which is an augment spell. The target will be the Deep Wood Scouts. And this time the spell easily goes off without irresistible force. And now those Scouts will have a -1 to hit augmentation from either close combat or missile attacks. Shooting phase. This time the Scouts will target the Dark Shards directly in front of them. And I think I failed to mention last time that they have armor piercing and double shots. So the Scouts let loose 20 arrows at the Dark Shards, who are also at long range, which accounts for 1 penalty, the other one being the multiple shots penalty. And the volley scores 7 hits, and then 4 go through as wounds. The Dark Shards have a 5+ armor save, and they score 1. So 3 final wounds go through on the Dark Shards. They are reduced from 20 to 17 elves, but not quite enough for a panic test. So this will end the shooting phase for the Wood Elves and their turn. Back to the Dark Elves. Movement phase. The Dark Elves do not declare any charges. Remaining moves. The Dark Shards inch forward only 5 inches. The Bleak Swords are peeling towards the right flank and the Deep Wood Scouts. And then the Dread Spears are peeling off towards the left flank. And the Harpies are soaring up right behind the Dread Spears on the left flank. And then the vanguard unit of Dark Riders continues to wheel around the forest. They are forced to take another dangerous terrain test, and they pass. Shooting phase. The Dark Shards aim towards the Deep Wood Scouts, but this will be a bit of a Hail Mary. The Scouts have phase protection. They are also long range. The Dark Shards have the move and shoot penalty as well, and there's cover provided to the scouts by the forest. In our club's rule set, if a unit is covered by at least 2 inches of forest, then 1/2 of the 2 hit rolls that are successful will be blocked by the trees. So all these different things are working against the Dark Shards in this desperate shooting attack. But at least they get 2 shots each, and they have armor piercing. Not that it matters with these scouts, who have no armor. So the Dark Shards shoot their 20 shots towards the scouts, and they manage to get 4 initial hits, but then 2 of them are blocked by the trees. And then rolling those 2 hits for wounds, they score 1. And those scouts have no armor saves, so 1 will fall. The first casualty among the Wood Elves. So that will end the shooting phase for the Dark Elves, and since nothing is in combat yet, that will end their turn. We'll go back to the Wood Elves. Movement phase. The Wood Elves don't declare any charges. For remaining moves, the Eternal Guard end up backing up a few inches away from the Dark Riders. On the left side, the Glade Guard, the Glade Captain, and the Dryads all marched forward. The Deep Wood Scouts remained in place once again. Magic phase. The Winds of Magic generate 5 dice for the power pool, and the wizard repeats the same spell from last time. Phase protection on the Deep Wood Scouts. He throws 3 dice and easily casts the spell, but unfortunately he again gets a double 6 and casts it with irresistible force. So he's due for another roll on the miscast table. This time he rolls and scores a 6 on the miscast table. So for that penalty, he will take a strength 4 hit, and then he cannot cast for the rest of the phase. So he takes the hit, but it does not generate a wound, and so he gets away with it that time. But the Deepwood Scouts are still granted phase protection for the next turn. Moving on to the shooting phase. The Deepwood Scouts decide to target the Dark Shards once again. A bit of a back and forth with these shooting units. This time they fire off 18 shots. And this time they land 12 hits. And then they roll those 12 hits for wounds. And they score 5 initial wounds. And the Dark Elves roll for their armor save once again. And they score 2. So 2 are saved and 3 go through. 3 more Dark Elves fall. But that's still not quite enough for a panic test. So that will end the shooting phase for the Wood Elves again, and their turn. We'll go back to the Dark Elves. Movement phase. The Dark Elves declare a charge. The Dark Riders into the Eternal Guard, and the Guard elect to hold. The charge distances in our club are a little shorter than what you are used to. What we do is we roll 2d6, and then we add the highest die rolled to the regular M move value. So it's just the highest die plus M. And then if they fail, then they will only move the highest die value. But these riders also have Swift Stride, so they will actually roll 3 and take the highest 2, but then move the highest 2 only if they fail. So the Dark Riders roll, and they fail, just shy. And in their failure, they only make it forward 5 inches. Close combat will be delayed. The Dark Elves are undeterred, and they declare another charge. This time the Bleak Swords into the Dryads. This would be a very long charge, and the Dryads elect to hold. And the bleak swords fail this charge as well. They only make it 4 inches. No more charges from the Dark Elves. Remaining moves. Back in the center, the Dread Spears and the Harpies continue to march and soar forward. And on the right flank, the Dark Shards do not move. Shooting phase. And the Dark Shards will target the Deep Wood Scouts once again. And since neither unit moved, the setup is exactly the same as last round, so I will skip right into the results. So the Dark Shards launched another 20 bolts, and they scored 5 hits, and then half of those were blocked by the trees, leaving 3 final hits, and those 3 hits carry through as 1 wound. With no armor saves, 1 more scout falls. That will end their shooting phase and another Dark Elf's turn. Turn 5. No charges from the Wood Elves. For remaining moves, the Dryads move forward and take position on top of the hill. And then no other units move. On to the magic phase. The Winds of Magic only generate 1 die for the power pool. So we have different rules for the Winds of Magic roll. We roll 1 die per the highest wizard level in the army, which in this case is now 1, since the spell singer is only a level 1 at this point in the game. So he can only roll 1 die to generate the Winds of Magic, and in this case he rolled a 1. That's why the power pool looks so bleak. The spell singer will try to cast Phase Protection 1 more time on the Deep Wood Scouts. He would need a 5+ in order to cast the spell. So he rolls the single die, and he fails. No Phase Protection this turn. Sometimes the Winds of Magic come in a little weak. Shooting phase. The Deepwood Scouts will target the Dark Shards once again, but now they're down to 16 shots. So they let them all fly, and they land 6 shots. And then rolling those 6 hits for wounds, they roll 3 wounds. The Dark Shards roll their armor save and they score 1. So 2 final wounds go through on the Dark Shards. The Scouts have now dropped 8 of them so far, but this will not end the shooting phase. The Dread Spears are now in range of the Glade Guard and the Glade Captain, but the Glade Guard will shoot first. They shoot off 20 arrows, and 10 of the arrows make hits, and then 6 of those hits go through as wounds. The Dread Spears roll for their armor save, and they score 3. So 3 wounds go through on the Dread Spears. And now the Glade Captain gets to shoot. So the Captain gets off 6 shots, and all 6 shots score hits. And then 3 of those hits go through as wounds. The Dread Spears roll for their armor save again and score 2, only allowing 1 wound from the Glade Captain. But that's a total of 4 wounds this round from shooting on the Dread Spears. That's almost 25% in 1 round. But this will end the shooting phase for the Wood Elves and their turn. The Dark Elves will declare a charge. The Bleak Swords will try again to charge into the Dryads. The Dryads will hold. And this time the Bleak Swords pass their charge. They make it in, and they also pass their fear check. And then the Dark Elves will try to charge their Dark Riders again into the Eternal Guard. The Eternal Guard hold. And this time the Dark Riders also pass their charge test. And that will be the final charge from the Dark Elves. We will have 2 close combats this turn. Remaining moves. The Harpies inched forward, and the Dread Spears marched forward. And then the Dark Shards in the corner stayed still once again. Shooting phase. The dark shards target the Deepwood Scouts one more time. They get off another 20 shots with their repeater crossbows, and their target is still at long range. They manage to get 9 hits, and then once again half of those are blocked by the trees, which is 4 blocks. 5 final hits go through, and then rolling for wounds. They score 0 wounds this time. They bomb that roll, so no scouts fall this turn. We'll head over to our first close combat, and that will be the Bleak Swords into the Dryads. But remember that both units have a character. The Bleak Swords have the Elf Master, and the Dryads have the Spellsinger, but the characters are not in a challenge together. And this fight will be a battle for the hill, and since the Dryads were the first ones there, they are considered to be on top, so the charging Bleak Swords are fighting uphill. And one thing different about this battle is that these elves do not have always strikes first. We are using the army special rules from the Warhammer Armies project, and so these units do not automatically come with always strikes first. So the initiative order is shown on the screen. We'll start with the Elf Master. So the Elf Master launches 3 attacks into the Dryads, and he lands 2. And then attempting for wounds, he scores 1 wound. And then the Dryads have no armor save, so 1 falls to the Master Elf. Next will be the Bleak Swords, and since they have a champion, they will have 10 attacks. So they roll to hit, and they score 4 hits. And then next, rolling for wounds, they score 2 wounds. And with no way to prevent those wounds, 2 more Dryads are cut down. That makes a total of 3. But now the Dryads get to strike back, and they have a special rule called Tree Aspects, which they get to choose a different aspect at the beginning of each close combat phase. And in this turn they chose the Birch aspect, which allows them to have +1 attack. But each Dryad already gets to have 2 attacks, and the champion normally gets to have 3. And then remember that supporting models only ever get 1 attack each. So we counted up 18 attacks from the Dryads. And also to remember is that the Dryads have hatred, so they also get to do some re-rolls. And so with that re-roll, they rolled up a total of 16 hits. And then rolling for wounds, they only roll up 6 wounds. And then the Bleak Swords have a 4+ armor save, and they end up scoring 4 of them. So only 2 final wounds go through on the Bleak Swords. And then last but not least, the Spellsinger also has 1 attack, but he swings and misses. So that will end all the strikes from both units. Combat resolution. So the Dark Elves end up winning this combat 7-3. The Dryads will take a break test, and they pass. So these units will be locked in combat for another round. And as I've mentioned in my other videos, we have a house rule for leadership bonuses and penalties based upon the results of close combat, and those can accumulate up to ± -3 from the original leadership value of the unit. And in this case, the Bleak Swords gained a bonus, and the Dryads took a penalty. Next combat will be the Dark Riders into the Eternal Guard. And the first attacks to be resolved will be the impact hits from the charging cavalry, and they score 1 automatic hit per steed. And rolling for wounds, they score 3 wounds. The guard attempt to save them and score 0 armor saves. So that eliminates 3 guard from the fight. And now the riders can strike. They will get 7 attacks. So the riders roll and they score 0 hits. They couldn't roll a single 5. And now the guard can strike back. And in fact, these attacks would have been simultaneous with the attacks of the riders. The weapon choice of the Eternal Guard gives them +1 initiative when they are charged, but also a +1 strength bonus when they are charged. Also, while using the Serath, they get +1 attack, and they get to fight in 1 extra rank. So these guys are absolutely deadly as core infantry. We counted 21 attacks from this unit, and they rolled and scored only 1 miss. 20 hits. They would have hit on 3 pluses. That was a phenomenal roll. And then they roll for wounds, and their luck carries through, and they score 17 of them. Even with the 4+ armor save, the Dark Riders will have a tough task saving 17 wounds. They roll and score 5. Not bad, but clearly not enough for this devastating attack from the Eternal Guard. So the Dark Riders get completely wiped out. No need for combat resolution, and the Guard get their +1 leadership bonus. And then they take advantage of a free reform. The Wood Elves are the first on the scoreboard, but that will complete the combat phase for this round. And that is the end of the Dark Elves' turn. We'll go back to the Wood Elves. The Wood Elves do not declare any charges. For remaining moves, the Guard will march up the center towards the Dread Spears. And there's no other movement. Now on to the magic phase. The Winds of Magic generate 5 dice for the power pool and 0 dice for the dispel pool. And the Spell Singer will attempt phase protection on the Deep Wood Scouts. He attempts with 2 dice, and he ends up failing the cast. And that fail causes him to break concentration, and will not be able to cast anymore this phase. Shooting phase. The Deep Wood Scouts will target the Dark Shards 1 more time, and they are still a long-range target. They launch their 16 armor-piercing arrows, and this time 7 of them hit their target, but then only 2 of those hits go through as wounds. The Dark Shards will try their armor save, which will be a 6+ with the armor piercing, and they score 0. So 2 more Dark Shards will fall to the Deepwood Scouts. But that is still not enough for a panic test. Next to shoot will be the Glade Guard, and they will target the Dread Spears. They fire off 20 shots, and they end up with 16 hits. And then the wounds roll only generates 5. That's how it's been with these Wood Elves so far. Lots of hits, but few wounds. And then the Dread Spears roll for their armor save, and they score 3. So only 2 wounds go through on the unit. And then right after the Glade Guard, the Glade Captain also fires into the Dread Spears, and he ends up tacking on 2 more final wounds on the Dread Spears. So that will make a total of 4 wounds that the Dread Spears have taken this phase, from the Glade Guard and the Glade Captain. So that puts them in a heavy casualties situation, and they will have to take a panic test. And they end up failing. They will turn around and run away from the shooters, and they end up running 8 inches. And that could end up making the situation worse for them in the long run. But that's going to end the Wood Elves shooting phase. On to the combat phase. Back over to the Dryads and the Bleak Swords. And in this combat round, the Dryads take on the Willow aspect, which gives them a -1 to hit bonus. And the first to strike will be the Elf Master. He throws his 3 strikes into the Dryads, and he hits with them all, but then he rolls for wounds and comes up with nothing. He only cuts a few sticks off of them. And then everyone else in the fight will strike simultaneously. So we'll start with the Dryads. And this time we counted 16 attacks, and they all go into the bleak swords. And this time they roll up 9 hits. And then rolling for wounds, they score 4. And then the bleak sword armor save comes up with 1 save. So 3 final wounds remain on the unit. And then we'll look at the Spell Singer. He throws his 1 attack into the bleak swords, and he manages to make a hit, but then he fails to wound. Now on to the bleak swords. They strike back with 10 attacks. They manage to score 4 hits, and then 3 of those carry through as wounds. And then the Dryads do not score any ward saves. So 3 of them fall to the bleak swords. On to combat resolution. The bleak swords win the combat 5-4. The wounds were even at 3, but then the Dryads had the hill, and then the bleak swords had an extra rank and the banner. The Dryads will take a leadership penalty and the bleak swords a leadership bonus. And then the Dryads roll for their break test and they pass. The fight for the hill is not yet decided, but that will end the combat phase for the Wood Elves and their turn. So now over to the Dark Elves' turn. No charges declared from the Dark Elves, but they make an attempt to rally the Dread Spears, and they are successful in doing so. But I am not sure if that's really good news for them. They are just as vulnerable to the Wood Elves shooting as they were before, and now the potential to get into close combat will be delayed. For remaining moves, the Harpies move back a couple of inches, although I don't have any photos to illustrate, and I'm not really sure why they did that. Maybe they're concerned for being the next target of the Wood Elf shooting. And then over in the corner, the Dark Shards inch forward a little bit, but they do not march. And I think that will eliminate the long-range penalty on the Deepwood Scouts. But of course now they would take one for move and shoot. But that will conclude the movement phase of the Dark Elves. Shooting phase. The Dark Shards will fire into the Deepwood Scouts one more time, but now they're down to only half of their original unit, but they still fire off 20 bolts, and this time they get 7 hits, and then 3 of those are blocked by the trees, so that leaves 4 dice for the wound roll, and they end up scoring wounds with all 4 dice. And that will put the Deepwood Scouts in a heavy casualties situation and will have to roll a panic test. So the Scouts roll for panic and they fail. They must turn around and flee deeper into the woods. And they end up going 4 inches. So the Scouts were the first ones to blink in this shooting game of chicken. So now there's 6 inches of forest between the Deepwood Scouts and the Dark Shards. And our club rules say that 4 inches of forest completely obscures a unit from targeting. So essentially the Deepwood Scouts have ran deeper into the forest to where the Dark Shards cannot target them. So that will end the shooting phase. Now we're on to combat. Back over to the Bleak Swords and the Dryads. And once again, the Elf Master will attack first, and then all the others will be simultaneous. So his 3 attacks ends up with only 1 hit. And then rolling for wounds, he scores nothing. A big goose egg. Just cutting off twigs again. Next to strike were the bleak swords. They throw all their attacks into the dryads again. They end up with 5 hits. And then 3 of those go through as wounds. The dryads try their ward save and they get nothing. So 3 more dryads are now stumps. But now they can strike back. And they end up rolling 14 hits. And then they roll for wounds and score a whopping 11 wounds on the bleak swords. A devastating roll. And the bleak swords roll for their armor save and they score 6 armor saves. Not bad. But that will still permit 5 final wounds on the unit. And then last but not least, the Spellsinger rolls for his attack and misses. Combat resolution. This time the dryads edge out the bleak swords by 1 point, 6-5, thanks to all those wounds. The leadership balance is adjusted accordingly. And now it's the bleak swords' turn for a break test. And they pass. This is a hill that they are willing to die on. Another round will be upcoming. And that will end the combat phase for the Dark Elves and their turn. The Wood Elves do not declare any charges, but they try to rally the Deep Wood Scouts, and their rally test passes. They turn around, but they are still too deep within the woods to be targeted. Remaining moves. The Eternal Guard march forward towards the Dread Spears, and then the Glade Guard and the Glade Captain inch forward a little bit. Magic phase. This time the Spellsinger had 4 dice in the power pool to work with, and he tried to cast spell number 2, the Speed of Light, upon his own unit. And that one passed without a hitch. So now the Dryads will have Initiative 10 and Weapon Skill 10. That means they'll get to strike with their double attacks first, and then they'll only miss on 1s. The trees are about to unload their wrath. But first, the shooting phase. This time the Glade Guard do not target the Dread Spears. They decide to leave their fate to the Eternal Guard. Instead, they decide to target the Harpies, who will be long range, and they will have a move and shoot penalty. And since they did a move and shoot, they will not be able to have double shots this turn. And in case you're wondering about line of sight, remember that the Harpies are 10 inches up above the table, conceptually, so the tree and the rocks do not obscure the line of sight from the Glade Guard. So they shoot and they manage to hit with 7 of their arrows. And then rolling for wounds, they manage to get 5. And since the Harpies have no armor save or ward save, that will be enough to eliminate the whole unit. Another score for the Wood Elves. Back to combat between the Bleak Swords and the Dryads. And in case you're wondering about the body count thus far, we are down to the Dark Elf Master with 9 other Bleak Swords. And on the other side, the Wood Elves are down to the Spellsinger and 6 Dryads. So the Dryads and the Spellsinger will get to strike first with their Initiative 10. And they will only miss on 1s. And then for this round, the trees took on the Birch aspect, which gives them the +1 attack. So we counted 15 attacks from the Dryads, and they roll and only get 1 miss, so 14 hits. And then rolling for wounds, they get 8. 8 wounds on the Bleak Swords. They will try their armor save and score 2. So 6 Bleak Swords fall to the Dryad's wrath. The Spellsinger is up next. and he also hits with his single attack. But then rolling for wounds, he comes up with nothing again. Now the Dark Elves can strike back, but now they are down to the Elf Master and 3 bleak swords. The Elf Master will strike first. He will only be able to hit on 6s. And he ends up squeezing in 2 hits. And then rolling for wounds, he ends up scoring nothing. Next will be the bleak swords. With their weapon skill 4 against weapon skill 10 of the Dryads, they will need a 7+ in order to score hits. And a 7+ is a 6 first and then followed up by a 4+. So the bleak swords desperately launch their 4 attacks, and they manage to squeeze one through. 1 hit. And then rolling for wounds, that 1 hit does score a wound. The Dryads tried to save it with their ward save, and they fail. So 1 final wound does go through on the Dryads. Combat resolution. It's obvious that the Speed of Light spell gave the Dryads the edge and the win for this combat. The Dryads win 7-2. Leadership balances were adjusted, and then the Dark Elves have to take a break test. They are now down to their original leadership value. They roll and they pass. This fight is not over, but that will end this combat round, and we'll go back to the Dark Elves. The Dread Spears declare a charge into the Eternal Guard. It's either charge or be target practice for the Glade Guard. This is another long charge, and they roll and they pass. The Dread Spears and the Eternal Guard will be in combat. Remaining moves. I don't have a shot for this, but the Dark Shards marched towards the forest that's holding the Deepwood Scouts. They came within 1.5 inches of the edge of the forest. And since the Dark Shards marched, there will be no shooting phase this turn. Back to combat, and we'll go over to the Dryads and the Bleak Swords. And you are looking at the parting shot from the last round, so you can ignore all the wounds still laying on the table. And also remember that the Wood Elves have their Speed of Light spell still in effect for this turn, so they will get to strike first and will only miss on 1s. So we'll let the Spellsinger go first, and he ends up rolling a 1 for his single attack, so he actually misses. And then the Dryads get to roll. They have 14 attacks now, and they roll up only 1 miss, so that's 13 hits. And then rolling for wounds, they score 6 wounds, and those were all directed into the Bleak Swords. They get to roll for their armor save, and they end up scoring 4. So only 2 final wounds go through on the Bleak Swords, but that will eliminate the Musician and the Standard Bearer. The unit is only down to the Master and the Champion, but now they get to strike back. But this time the Speed of Light proves too much for them, and the Master and the Champion are both unable to score any hits. Combat resolution. This time the Dryads win 3-0. Leadership is adjusted accordingly. At one point the Bleak Swords were +2 on leadership. Now they're down -1. The Dryads will also take the points for capturing the banner. And then the Dark Elves must take their break test. They roll and they pass. They are relentless. We'll see these guys again in the next round. But for now, let's go over to the other fight with the Dread Spears and the Eternal Guard. This should be an interesting combat. These 2 units could be considered the best units of both teams. But the Dread Spears are down to 12 elves, and then the Eternal Guard are down to 17. Both sides get to fight with an extra rank. The Dread Spears will have +1 initiative due to the charge, And then the Eternal Guard get +1 initiative and +1 strength because they are on the defensive with their Sirath weapons. And those Siraths give them +1 attack as well. But then the Sirath also requires 2 hands, which will eliminate the use of their shields during this combat. But the Dread Spears can use their shields. So let's see how this goes. These attacks will be simultaneous, but we'll start with the Dread Spears. The Dread Spears will have 13 attacks. They roll and they connect with 5 for 5 hits. Then they roll those 5 hits for wounds and they score 1. The guard try for an armor save and they fail. So 1 Eternal Guard is down. But now they can strike back. The Eternal Guard will have 21 attacks back. And their to-hit roll scores 15 hits. And rolling those 15 hits for wounds, they score 12 of them as wounds. And then the Dread Spear get to roll for their armor save. And they score 5. Resulting in 7 final wounds upon the unit. Combat resolution. I don't know if the Eternal Guard have magic dice, but either way, this was another solid victory for them. They win 10-4. They will get another leadership bonus, and the Dread Spears will have to take a break test. They roll for the test, and they fail. They will run from the Eternal Guard. They turn around and run 7 inches away. The guard decide to pursue, and they catch 'em. 11 inches they go. And the guard have plenty of unit strength to wipe out the entire remaining unit of the Dread Spears. The Wood Elves will score those points, and that will be the last combat of the round. Things are looking pretty bleak for the Dark Elves at this point. They are down to just their dark shards and the small remains of their bleak swords. We'll see if they can salvage any points out of the remainder of their army. But next up will be another Wood Elf's turn. And the Wood Elves do not declare any charges onto remaining moves. So the Glade Guard pivot towards the Dark Shards, and then the Eternal Guard also march towards them. Magic phase. And for this turn, the Winds of Magic generate 4 dice for the power pool. The Spellsinger attempts the Speed of Light spell once again on his own unit. And again it goes off successfully without a hitch. The Dryads will have Initiative 10 and Weapon Skill 10 for the next round. That's the end of the magic phase. On to the combat. Now the unit of Dryads are down to 6 attacks. They will strike first with their initiative of 10. And they end up rolling only 1 miss, which gives them 5 hits. Those 5 hits are rolled for wounds, and they score 2 wounds. The Bleak Sword Champion rolls for his armor save, and he scores 1 save. That allows 1 wound to go through, and that finishes off the Bleak Sword Champion. The Elf Master now stands alone. And now for the Spellsinger attack. He rolls a 1 again, so he misses his attack. And now the Elf Master can strike back. He has 3 attacks and will need 6s to hit. And he does score 1. So 1 goes through, and then he rolls for wounds and scores that die for a wound as well. And then the Dryads fail on their ward save. So each side ends up taking a wound in this turn. Combat resolution. And the Wood Elves win 2-1, thanks to their position on the hill. The Elf Master will take another hit to his leadership, and then the Dryads will gain a leadership, and then score the points for the Bleak Swords as well. So the Elf Master must take a break test. And he passes this one as well. The Elf Master is not gonna run, but will stand his ground and fight. But that will be the end of the Wood Elves combat phase. We'll go back over to the Dark Elves. The Dark Elves have a charge to declare. The Dark Shards will charge into the Dryads. And the charge is successful. There will be no rest for the Dryads. But both units have been thinned down. This will be an interesting combat. But the Dark Shards had to take a fear check, and they passed. And then a few of them had to travel through the forest during the charge. And so there were a few dangerous terrain checks that had to be tested. And as a result, one Dark Shard was wounded from the charge. That will end the movement phase. We will skip shooting and move on to close combat. And for that we will stay right here on this hill. And even though the Dark Shards charged this turn, the Dryads still have their Speed of Light spell active. So they will strike first. But starting with the Spellsinger one more time, he rolls another 1 and misses his attack. I think that's the 3rd time in a row. So next the Dryads attack. They end up only rolling 1 miss and put 2 hits on the Master and 5 on the Dark Shards. But then rolling for wounds, all the hits on the Dark Shards end up failing. But the 2 hits on the Master end up going through as wounds, and then he ends up saving them both. So the Dryads end up with a big 0 on this turn. But the Dark Shards do not fare any better. Remember that they need 6s to hit. The Elf Master ends up with nothing, but the Dark Shards get 1, and then the Dryads are able to save it with their ward save. So despite all the drama, this ends up being a 0 in both directions. So on to combat resolution. So the Dark Shards end up winning this one, and we still counted the Dryads as having the hill, but the Dark Shards still prevail. Their boldness in charging has paid off. After we adjusted the leadership levels, the Dryads took a break test, and despite all the bonuses that they have piled up, they fail the break test. They turn around and run only 4 inches. The Dark Shards decide to pursue, and they run only 3 inches. The Dryads survive. These 2 units are doing all the work, so I guess they're a little tired. So that is all the Dark Elves can do this turn, and we'll go back to the Wood Elves. The Wood Elves open this round by declaring a charge. This will be the Glade Captain into the Elf Master, and the Elf Master will hold. He says, "Bring it, Leaf Eater." So the Captain tests his charge, and he passes the charge. We will find out who's the biggest elf. And then after that, the Dryads take a rally test for their unit, and they pass that one. They turn around to face the Dark Shards, and then for remaining moves, all the other units reform so as to face this hill of treachery. The remaining Dark Elves are completely surrounded, with the Glade Guard on one side, the Eternal Guard in the rear, the Scouts hidden in the forest, and then the Dryads right in front of them. Magic phase. The Winds of Magic generate only 2 dice this time. After just rallying, that's all the Spellsinger could muster. So he attempts the Speed of Light one more time on his own unit, and it still goes off once more. The Dryads will have Weapon Skill 10 and Initiative 10, but they are not in close combat yet. So we'll go on to the shooting phase. And this time the Glade Guard will target the flank of the Dark Shards. The Glade Guard will get 10 shots since they did a reform, but they also are at close range. And with that, they end up scoring 7 hits. but then rolling for wounds, they end up scoring only 3. So the Dark Shards get to try their armor save, which is reduced due to armor piercing, so they will need 6s. So the Dark Shards roll, and they score all 3. No wounds go through on the Dark Shards. They will not go down easy. The Glade Guard thought they had that one in the bag, but we'll go on to close combat between the 2 army generals. The Glade Captain will have the initiative, and their weapon skills will be tied at 6. They will each get 3 attacks. The Elf Captain ends up getting 2 hits on the Master, and then both of those hits go through as wounds. Each only has 2 wounds to give. The Master has medium armor and will need a 5+ armor save, 2 of them at least. And he scores 1. He is still alive, but he is wounded. But he does get to strike back with his 3 attacks. And he ends up getting 0 hits. Things are not looking good for this Dark Elf Master. Combat resolution. The Glade Captain ends up winning 2-1 with his charge and his wound. The Elf Master only earns a point for higher ground. After making leadership adjustments, he will have to take a leadership test. But the odds are stacked against him. He is wounded, and his leadership is knocked down by 3 points. His courage is waning thin. So he rolls for his fate, and passes. This Dark Elf will not run from a leaf-eating elf. Better to die than know the shame. That will end this combat round and the Wood Elves' turn. We'll go back to the Dark Elves. Dark Elves movement phase. The Dark Shards decide not to charge into the Dryads. Instead, they will do the job with their crossbows. So we'll move straight into the shooting phase. The Dark Shards will get to fire 19 shots into the 4 Dryads and 1 Spellsinger. And since they are close range, they will get +1 to hit. So they roll and they only miss with 4, so that makes 15 hits. And then rolling for wounds, they get 7 wounds. All the Dryads have is a 6+ ward save, and they fail them all. The remaining Dryads and the Spellsinger are wiped out by the shower of crossbow bolts, and the Dark Elves will score on those points. But now, due to nearby annihilation, the Deepwood Scouts will have to take a panic test. They had front row seats to the entire massacre, so they roll and end up failing. They roll for their panic distance and end up with a 4, which is just enough to get them off of the edge of the table and out of play. The Deepwood Scouts hightailed it and got out of there. They will live to scout another day. So the Dark Elves score a little more off of that panic test. But we are still not done with consequences. We play with a club rule called the Killed Leader Reaction Chart. And with the death of the Spellsinger, this chart will come into play now. We put together this rule to imitate the reaction of other leaders and units to the death of a beloved hero. So the rule says, immediately roll on the chart whenever the following occurs. Either your army general is killed, or another lord, hero, or battle standard bearer within 12 inches of your unit. So basically, if your army general is killed, all units on the battlefield will roll on the chart. But for other characters, only if you are within 12 inches. And then first, you roll for each surviving character, if there are any, and those effects will pass onto their units if they are part of a unit. And then you roll for each of the other units without characters. And in this situation, all of the Wood Elf units that are surviving are within 12 inches of where the Spellsinger was slain. So they all get to roll. And here is the chart. So we will start with the Glade Guard. They roll up a 5, which will give them hatred for the Dark Shards. Next will be the Glade Captain, fighting on the hill with the Master. He rolls up a 6, which will give him Frenzy. And then the Eternal Guard. They rolled up a 1, which makes them take an immediate panic test. And they passed. So nothing really happens with them. So now we're finally done with all the consequences from the death of the Spellsinger. So that will end the shooting phase. We'll move on to the combat phase. Over to the hill with the Master and the Glade Captain. This time they will be attacking simultaneously. But now the Captain has Frenzy. And then the Elf Master only has 1 wound left to give. So the Captain rolls for his 4 attacks. And he scores 2 hits. And then rolling for wounds, he scores 0 wounds. Lucky break for the Elf Master. And now he gets his 3 attacks back. And he hits with all 3. Remember that the Captain does not have any armor saves, ward saves, or parry saves. The parry save from the Elven Grace rule only works on models with a lower initiative, which does not apply here. And he's only got 2 wounds to give. So the Elf Master rolls for wounds, and he scores 2. The Elf Captain is slain by the wounded Elf Master. That is not what anyone was expecting. You gotta love Warhammer. So the Dark Elves will score again off of that kill. So in one turn, the Dark Elves have gone from zeros to heroes, reaching 625 points. But now the Wood Elves must take panic tests once again for nearby annihilation. But the 2 remaining units, the Glade Guard and the Eternal Guard, both pass their panic test. And then next, they both must roll on the killed leader reaction chart, with the army general having been killed. So the Glade Guard end up rolling a 4, but that effect will not apply to them since they do not have a wizard in the unit. Next we'll go on to the Eternal Guard, and they roll another 1, which is the panic test. But since they already passed a panic test during this same phase, they do not need to retake it now, so they will get a pass on that one as well. So that wraps up all the consequences for the death of the Glade Captain, and this will also end the combat phase for the Dark Elves and their turn. We'll go back to the Wood Elves. The Wood Elves open the round by declaring a charge. The Elf Master will get charged by the Eternal Guard. At the end of the last phase, the Elf Master decided to do a free reform to face the Glade Guard, but the attack instead came from the Eternal Guard. But he decides to hold anyways, and the Eternal Guard make the charge. And that there is the closest we could get these models into base contact due to the slope on the hill, but they will be in combat during the combat phase. For remaining moves, the Glade Guard inch forward towards the Dark Shards, and that will end the movement phase. And now we will skip the magic phase and move on to shooting. The Glade Guard are going to target the Dark Shards. So it's their turn to fire 10 shots at close range. See how the Dark Elves like their own tactics used against them. So they end up with only 1 miss out of the 10, so 9 hits. Very impressive. Their 2 wound roll is also impressive. They score 7 wounds. Devastating roll. The Dark Shards roll for their armor save, and they score 2. So 5 final wounds will go through from the Glade Guard into the Dark Shards. And that's enough wounds for a panic test due to heavy casualties. So the Dark Shards roll for their panic test, and they pass. They will not run, but there's only 4 of them left. Over to close combat on the hill that is strewn with corpses. The Elf Master is fighting for his life against the Eternal Guard who just charged into him. I think we all know the Master's fate, but how soon it will come is the only question. And even though the Eternal Guard charged, the Master will get to strike first due to his higher initiative. So at least he gets to do some damage if he can. So he rolls his 3 attacks, and he scores hits with 2. And then rolling for wounds, he scores nothing. He may have spent all he had left on the slaying of that Glade Captain. The Eternal Guard have nothing to fear from the Master, and now they get to retaliate, and they will have 12 attacks back due to base contact rules. So they end up only hitting with 4 hits, and then rolling for wounds, they score 2. 2 wounds that the Elf Master must try to save for his life. So he rolls for his 2 armor saves, and he scores 1. The Eternal Guard slip 1 in, and he takes another wound. He will fall as another casualty, bleeding out on the hill. The Wood Elves will score his points, and then the Dark Shards will have to take a roll on the killed leader reaction chart. They end up rolling a 1, which is the panic test, but then they pass that panic test. They will hold steady, but those Dark Shards are now all that there is left of the entire Dark Elves army. That will end the Wood Elves' turn, and we'll go over to the Dark Elves and see what the Dark Shards will do. For their turn, the Dark Shards try to march as far away as they can from their enemies. I think the Dark Shards are trying to run out the clock with only 2 rounds left, basically playing keep away with the final points that they have to offer the Wood Elves. So there's nothing else that the Dark Elves can do this turn, so now we'll go back to the Wood Elves. Movement phase. The Wood Elves don't think it's likely they can chase down the Dark Shards, so instead they decide to pivot the Glade Guard towards them. They will try the skill of their archers. So moving into the shooting phase, the Glade Guard fire off 10 shots, and they end up getting 8 hits on the Dark Shards. And then they roll for wounds and score 7 wounds. The Dark Shards try for their armor save, and they score 1 save. So 6 wounds will be inflicted on the remaining 4 Dark Shards, which will wipe them out. No more Dark Elves are standing on the battlefield. So the Wood Elves will take the victory over the Dark Elves. But the Wood Elves definitely took some heavy casualties, with only 2 units remaining. And we will tally up the final points in the post-game analysis, which will be coming up next. So the Wood Elves eliminated the entire army of the Dark Elves, with each unit gaining their full points, for a total of 1,001. And then they also gained bonus points for 4 unit standards, and also the bonus points for slaying the army general. So the Wood Elves earned a grand total of 1,201 points. So the Dark Elves eliminated the Wood Elves Dryads, as well as the Spellsinger, the Deepwood Scouts, and the Glade Captain. They also earned the bonus points for killing the Army General. They scored a grand total of 625 points. So the Wood Elves will take the victory for this battle. They won by a margin of 576 points, which is the biggest point spread so far in this tournament. And here's the league standings after the results of this game. The Wood Elves are momentarily in the lead of all the teams, and the Dark Elves are pulling up the rear. And now Bonepile Miniatures would like to recognize the MVP of the game. And the recognition will go to the Wood Elves Eternal Guard. This unit had a fantastic battle. They are built for defense, and they proved it here. They showed us how it's done when they took the charge from 6 Dark Riders from the front, eliminating the entire group in one blow from their Sirath weapons. And then they took another charge from 12 Dread Spears. After one round of close combat, the Dread Spears ran away in a panic and were ultimately cut down by the pursuers. And then last but not least, the Eternal Guard charged into the Elf Master. They delivered the final mortal wound upon the Elf Master, avenging the death of their brave Glade Captain. A total of 19 Dark Elves were slain by their masterful skills, and themselves only losing 4 elves from their unit. An honorable mention from the Dark Elves team is the unit of Dark Shards. The beginning of the battle put themselves in a shootout between them and the Deepwood Scouts. Despite all kinds of shooting penalties and trees robbing their hits, they were able to eventually send those Deepwood Scouts fleeing into the woods for safety. And then after the shootout, they went charging into the Dryads. Their unexpected attack ultimately sent the Dryads running away from the hill. And then on their next turn, they gave the Dryads a volley from their repeater crossbows and completely destroyed the unit, including the Wood Elf Spellsinger. And then that heroic action sent the Deepwood Scouts fleeing out of the woods and off the battlefield. And then ultimately, the Dark Shards were the last unit to fall on the battlefield of the Dark Elves, brought down by a shower of arrows from the Glade Guard. So here's some of the essential stats from the game, starting with the Wood Elves. Charges. Looks like they played a lot of defense this game. Magic. The Spellsinger almost completely had his way with magic this game. But mostly with augment spells, which served his army well. The wizard couldn't buy a wound in close combat, but he made up for it with a couple of magic wounds. Shooting. This army shot almost 200 arrows, and that cut down almost 1/3 of the Dark Elves. Close combat. Most of the dirty work came from 2 units. And here's some stats from the Dark Elves. Charges. They were the more aggressive team. Shooting. The repeater crossbows were relentless. and close combat. Most of the damage coming from the bleak swords. This will conclude our battle report. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you would like to be notified when our next battle report drops. You can also check out additional content on our channel and at our hobby blog, which is bonepileminiatures.com. You can find information on our club rules, our army showcases and discussions, as well as army background stories and some of our other battle reports. And feel free to leave us any questions or comments. And with that, we will see you next time.